Welcome, Todd and Dana. We're here with Maliah this time. And this is, I think, going to be one of our best episodes, best discussions, because Dana's into some
Into a lot of stuff
rabbit hole stuff here.
that
Yeah.
we have brought up in California over the past couple of years. And we've been doing this show, Todd, we're in our third year.
Oh wow.
Did you know that? Yeah,
Where does the time go?
I know, right? And we started out with Grand Chingon. Do you remember? Let's remind the audience a bit where we stand with Grand Chingon.
Well, interesting is 'cause I'm glad Dana's here because we've actually been discussing the Grand Chingon as part of the 4P research. And we think that perhaps on one level it's Grand Chingon, which is a Spanish word, which means according to Google, awesome dude or intimidating dude. But we believe once you peel the onion back a layer, that it's the Grand Shingon, which is Japanese Buddhist esoteric term that which means the one true word. I think Dana could probably elaborate on that a little bit more.
Yeah, let's do it.
So as far as Ed's files go, that was kind of my introduction into the concept of the Grand Shingon, and it was, I believe, the Kali Thug cult. It was a big death cult out in Japan that they were looking into, and that was a term that they had used, but it was with the S, so Shingon versus Chingon. I feel like a lot of people try to correct me, and fair enough, but they say no, Chingon means this, and I'm like, well, there could be a bit more of an esoteric angle to it with the Japanese side. I think though that as far as the concept of the Grand Shingon, Bruce Davis alleged that Manson was the head Shingon, as far referring to Manson. I think that what we're more likely looking at is some of these spooky doctors and spooky hypnotists are likely basically like factional sort of Shingons that are kind of running the show that have access to all of these people. But that's just my opinion at this time and is obviously open to change.
Right. I think that's really interesting considering that like the he's also known as the head devil. So it's very fitting. It's a very fitting theory that it's the Grand Chingon or Grand Shingon because it's the person who's able to get into your head, right? It's not just a name of a position of power. It's a description as well. That's what makes this case so interesting is because there's so many freaking levels. Like if you read Project Artichoke, right, by David M. Sylvie, who passed away in the process of editing the book. Um, he names William Joseph Bryan as the Grand Shingon and our Shingon. And the interesting thing is there's actual multiple Shingons or Chingons because in 1969 the 4P schisms into multiple groups, into two groups, one in Santa Cruz and another in O'Neill Park in Santa Ana, which is in Orange County.
Mhm.
And if you read Maury Terry's work, he says that the Shingon cult, which is the 4P cult, otherwise known as the 4Pi movement, um, is doing well in the 1980s. They have like over 1,000 members. They're nationwide and they're very prevalent at like UCLA and whatnot. Now, another interesting thing about the different names, the Shingon cult, the 4P, the 4Pi movement. There's a possibility, and of course, there's complete speculation on my part, that that 4Pi stands for four pillars, as in the four pillars of destiny, which is Chinese. Um, so it kind of goes with the whole Buddhist, Japanese, Chinese, um, uh,
Mythology.
mythology.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you
Let's
go.
let's not forget the Chumash connection we've discussed.
Yes, that's
Dana, I don't
very
know if you're
important.
familiar with this, but in my Empire of the Wheel research, I learned about Chininch, which is this god and the theme of the head, the horned head, sometimes referred to as headless, but horned. Um, was the god that the Chumash of California worshipped back in ancient times, and allegedly Catalina Island, it was the seat of this god. So here you have in California this mythology with this god, kind of a dark figure, with a similar, Chingan, Chining, Chininch, and all that. So it could be that the reference even, is making a nod to ancient California, and consider the Manson stuff all happen in California. I think it's interesting.
Yeah, right up there in Laurel Canyon, where, of course, the Tate murders happen, and so many others. Now, Dana, some of your research is pretty much leading to this very small town in Utah. And let's talk a little bit about the Animal Friends Family Rescue and how that's connected to this in Canab there.
So the Best Friends Animal Society, BFAS, they are not fans of me, but they know who I am, all of them. So when you're reading through, even if it's the public consumption narrative, or even when you find the online groups that the old guard of the process is running today, they've always worshipped animals. Animals have always been pure. They are always been vehemently anti-vivisection. That is in some of the earliest process literature that they put out. The story that they like to tell is that one of the women that joined the group from New Orleans, who ends up, seducing Robert de Grimston and taking him away from Marianne and the group schisms. I don't really endorse that narrative. I think that was for public show. That way they could cover more ground, even though Robert and Marianne did split up legally. But there's always the animal advocacy in the background, even when they have this schism and they start going towards what they present as Christian theology, but it's actually not. And Marianne says so herself. It's all based off of Jehovah, because she identifies herself as a Jehovah Luciferian. So everything is with, like, they changed the coffee houses names from Satan's Cavern to Jay's Place, Jehovah's Place. In all of that literature, they compare everything to the treatment of animals, and it's very weird because in the very early 80s, because they had a big location in Atlanta, one of their magazines was actually had the audacity to talk about the Atlanta child murders, but how killing animals was worse. That's what they published in their magazine, and I'm just like, okay, that's a really hot take, guys. But they make their exile out of Atlanta, I think, about 2 or 3 months after Wayne Williams was convicted, and they head to Canab. That used to be called Little Hollywood. They brokered a lot of very serious deals with some powerful Mormon families in order to secure that property, which I think is really interesting. There are rumors from the Church of Scientology that Jack Nicholson also helped fund the purchase of that property initially, as well as, for sure, one of the co-founders of Earthlink, which, kind of tracks for what they were doing out there. Because initially, when the authorities started investigating the process, or Best Friends, in Canab, they were running, per a Utah State Crime Police report, they were running enough electricity to power a city just in the small sanctuary. And this was before they had the amount of property that they have now. There were people that said that the Processians, the people working there at the sanctuary, would threaten to shoot you down with a cruise missile, because, people have planes out there, private planes, helicopters, things like that. And when you went onto the property, there were no animals to be seen, no animals in sight. Mm-hmm. So the cops surmised that they were running something underground. I think that is the case as well. There is a lot of valuable, ancient artifacts, ancient tunnels out there from the local tribes that used to inhabit the area. There's also a really weird little fundamentalist Mormon group out there as well, which I think that maybe they kind of linked up with, because I don't really see how they could live in harmony.
Yeah.
But they pretty much have a monopoly in Canab now, and they own the water supply in Canab, which is really bizarre. Uh, it's
Now,
all
it's that really strange Mormon fundamentalist group that actually has ties to property in Yucatan, correct?
oh
Do you know about that?
no.
So these Mormon fundamentalists are breakaways, right? So they call themselves, the true interpretation of Joseph Smith's writings, right? So they believe in polygamy. They practice, oh, well, a lot of the early church writings they take literally, and these fundamentalists, of course, they receive a lot of pressure about their polygamy. Down in Mexico, not so much. And so they acquired some property on the peninsula right by a pyramid that was recently discovered in about 2010. And this pyramid is Catherwood's, it's known in the Catherwood files as the Diamond Pyramid. It was often believed to not exist, even because we hadn't found it. One of the only Catherwoods that we hadn't found. So a college in the United States acquired the property that the pyramid is on and is doing research. And then right next door, literally right next door to it, is a giant 500-hectare complex where these fundamentalists from Canab have been living there for over a decade now. It's a couple decades. And they have the Best Friends Animal Society going on there. So in Yucatan, we have also quite a big problem with wild dogs being everywhere. Big packs of wild dogs just running down the streets and stuff. So it's interesting that a portion of this international community in Yucatan, their main and only concern is rescuing these dogs. And so they have these huge dog shelters now, completely funded by American societies. It's wild.
How close is this compound to Stuhl, the place that
Stuhl?
that the Process Church when they were in Mexico? It was Stuhl that they were at, right? Stuhl?
We're trying to map it out. Just because the story that they tell doesn't track when you actually look at the map, because we have two things. We have two records. We have what they say, which is like, oh, we survived a hurricane because whatever, we found Satan and he protected us. We were beating ourselves in huts. And then the other story that the Church of Scientology says is that they were doing paramilitary training. Now, that location tracks with them not being so close to the beach. They're kind of out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
But you've got my interest. Like, my Kill Bill sirens are just screaming right now, because the Yucatan, the fundies, this dog stuff, that's fascinating to me. I did not know that. That's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, the Mormon Church is quite involved. There's actually quite a bit of Christian help groups that are involved with Yucatan, helping to build different villages up, helping to build houses. Habitat for Humanity is down there. And there's several others. But that was one that always kind of bothered me as a journalist down there, was why is so much effort being put into dogs when there's children on the street? There's old people that don't have a place to live because there's a lack of orphanages and elderly care centers. And so it's like, Americans, why are you caring so much about the dogs when there's people that could benefit from your help and your use here. And I don't know, just my little like,
May I interject something?
mhm.
I think it's really interesting about the Mormon stuff. I just want to remind you guys that Ted Bundy joined the Mormon Church.
Yeah.
And to connect it to the process or the 4P, it's believed that Ted was actually a member of the 4P. Also, because Ted moved to Utah, in the closer to 73, 74, somewhere in there. Also, to kind of connect more with what you guys are saying, like with Walter, what I was telling you earlier about what you told me about the phases of the moon.
Yeah.
And that last episode of William Ramsey, according to Ann Rule's book, Ted and whatever the cult he's associated with, they were killing people in accordance with the phases of the moon. So there's a possibility that there's Air Force MK Ultra used in that as well.
Sure.
Yeah. Anyways, I just wanted to put that out there just as a reminder, how much it does connect to the larger picture.
Yes.
And
Absolutely.
it really isn't a surprise the more you look at these things when these connections come up. In fact, it's very revealing, I think, of more possible evidence.
Okay, here we go. You guys see that?
Yes.
We should have sound. There I am. Right there.
Plaid shirt. ruins might have been used.
What's on there? There's the guy. That, of course, is one of my projects that I did there, Kakshil and worked with the Jaguar Reserve, which is how I found out about this giant property right next door to this, um, that these fundamentalists from Canab owned, which is
That's
like,
wild. That
what
is
is
just
doing?
you're literally blowing my mind with this. Like that's crazy to me because I had no idea that that was a thing, and that makes me question just how far back the Mormon connection goes with the process as well. Because I do think that it precedes their entry into Kanab, because they're in Arizona initially, and I finally nailed down the location in Arizona, but you don't really they were making some sort of backdoor deals because the property records are they pretty much don't exist. It's very shady. That everything comes out of the newspapers. I'm gonna have to look into this more because that's really fascinating, and I think that that is a good angle. And as far as the dog stuff goes, and just animals in general, I mean that kind of tracks for process theology because their theology is humanity is the devil. So they don't care about humans. They gave up on humanity a long time ago.
Yeah, 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 big time. And it's interesting how now, Todd, remind me how the um possible Aztec sacrifices could be connected with this. Am I right on that or off?
Yeah, you are right. What the informant describes to Ed Sanders and Paul Fitzgerald in the book The Family, also in the book Raising Hell, the Encyclopedia of Satanic Crime, the methodology of human sacrifice is heart extraction, heart consumption, just like the Aztecs. In fact, that Aztecs have 16-month years, and each month is like a different festival, and a lot of times it's different kinds of sacrifice. Most of the time it's a heart extraction and heart consumption. But um, two members that we know for sure is Stephen Hunn, who calls the Grand Chingon his guru, and also Stanley Dean Baker,
Mhm.
who pledges allegiance and fealty to the Grand Chingon. Interestingly enough, when Stephen Hunt and his little crew started killing, it's that right at the beginning of that the June 2nd festival. And then when Stanley Baker kills James Sclouser in July 11th, and cuts his heart out and eats it, it's right at the end of the that's the last day of a certain
Mm.
festival too. According to the Aztec human sacrifice calendar, you'll have to excuse me, I can't remember or pronounce the names
That's okay.
of these festivals. I've just
Well, that's the thing about Aztec. It's something very, very difficult to really track down and pin down because everybody and their brother has a different interpretation of the calendar. And
right,
if you're like me, I don't think that calendar's been alive for more than a couple 100 years. And in calendar speech, that is nothing. That's a drop in the bucket for, timekeeping, nothing compared to the Maya calendar, which is completely different. So,
right.
if an Aztecian calendar was coinciding, which I totally think it is, with sacrificial rites,
Mhm.
that makes a lot of sense because what we
Right.
see from Aztecs is hard eating. We see a lot of sacrificing going on, especially of young boys. There was a recent discovery found in Chichen Itza, which was conquered by the Aztecs later on.
Mhm.
And of okay, we know about the cenote, right? They've been dredging the cenote since Sylvanus Morley's time and finding different sacrificial items and bones, etc. But one thing that they said wasn't happening was that these heart sacrifices, where they'd take out the heart and eat it, of the young boys, was not
Mhm.
happening in Chichen Itza. Well, that has now been proven wrong. Archaeologists
Right.
have found hundreds of years old worth of bones
Mhm.
of young boys where they're obviously have had a sacrificial ritual happen to their sternum
Right.
and where their heart area is. So pretty much
Right.
pointing and leading that, yes, this is one of the ways that the Aztec conquered was through these kinds of massively disgusting rituals happening with fear
Well,
and panic of
so
the people.
the interesting thing, with the 4P, now what Dana and I are kind of considering right now is the possibility that of course, it's not Satanism. It's more or less eclectic paganism or neo-paganism, because you see different kinds of sacrifices associated with the 4P, like Arliss Perry.
Mm,
Mhm.
Her murder is associated with the 4P,
mm,
and that's actually Babylonian with the ice pick in the base of the skull. They were doing that in Mesopotamia and in Babylon. And then this Black Panthers captain who was found in 1971 in Santa Cruz, he was dismembered and then burnt. It's similar to the Phoenician tradition of human sacrifice.
mhm.
Wow.
So we're pulling the threads, and we're working the theory that we're dealing with neo-paganism, which even connects to the Nazis, because as you know, the Thule Society was very pagan. Rudolf Hess and Heinrich Himmler and all those guys, right?
Yeah.
Mhm. Well, let's talk about the dentist for a little while, Dana, if you don't mind. This crazy dentist. Now, if I understand this right, he's had offices all over the place. I can never remember this guy's name. I'm so bad with names, but
Which dentist are we talking about? We're talking about
the hypnotist one who's
oh, okay.
strangely connected to all these things.
So this is something that me and Todd have been talking about because I didn't know that he had studied William J. Bryan for a long time, and so we had a long discussion about that. So the guy that I was looking at, he's not a dentist, but he was a naval officer, and so while he was in the Navy, he was teaching dentists and doctors how to use hypnotism instead of anesthesia to
Mm.
put the patients under, which the pictures in the newspaper are absolutely horrifying because they're literally just like ripping people's teeth out while he's standing there. But this individual, William Denier, it's interesting. He's a footnote, a literal footnote in chaos. And I don't understand why, because when you look at Ed Sanders' files, William Denier was very good friends with Charles Manson. William Denier also debated William J. Bryan Jr. About the Tate murders in regards to if Charles Manson actually hypnotized the family. So there's a lot of weird crossover there. I don't really know what the end game is with those individuals, but William Denier was stationed in Hawaii when he was doing all of this, and he got into a bit of trouble because allegedly, according to the court records, he was hypnotizing underage girls. They were teenagers. To do inappropriate things with him, and he was trying to move them out of Hawaii. He ended up getting charged with white slavery, which is just a really bold title for that. Um, and he ends up coming over to the States, and he basically sets up shop on the Sunset Strip. So he's right there in the thick of it. And like I said, I don't know if I don't really see what the separation would be from him hanging out with the likes of Brian, with the likes of Jolly West, with the likes of Martin Orne, because in Ed's files, Martin Orne was also doing hypnotism research for the Office of Naval Intelligence. He was doing it for a couple of years with them. So, I mean, are these guys all kind of just, playing like Ring Around the Rosie with Manson, with Sirhan, with, pick one and just pass them around? Because I do think that that's what they were doing. I think that they each had a specialty that they kind of brought to the table. Me and Todd had talked about this. It was kind of his theory was, like Jolly's the drug guy, right? Jolly's the one that's running the drugs. And I think that Jolly was hanging out with the family. I think that he was partaking a bit of his creation. I also think that there's an argument that George Hunter White might have been there as well. And then, the hypnotists kind of using their craft and them kind of like testing each other. That's what me and Todd had been talking about. Like,
Yeah.
here's notes on how you can improve, and here's notes on how you can improve, and really
Right.
conditioning these individuals to be hypnotized.
Right. Hypnoconditioning. It was revolutionized by William Joseph Bryan. Now, William Joseph Bryan, while he was in the Air Force, and I should add, he claims he was also an electrical engineer in the Navy.
Mhm.
Um, while he was in the Air Force, he starts the American Institute of Hypnosis, in which a large contingent of the members of that group are dentists. Now he starts this thing in I think it's either 1956, 19 I want to say 1956 or 57 off the top of my head. I'll have to go back and look at the newspaper articles on that. Um but yeah, of course, like I said earlier, William J. Bryan is thought to be the Grand Shingon because he was 350 pounds. Interestingly enough, just like Dinyard in his addiction to women, William Joseph Bryan found himself in a similar situation in 1969, hypnotizing women to have sex with him because he was a sex addict. Him being 350 pounds means the blood has to work harder to run through his body, which means hypertension, which means why he's so abrasive, and why he would need a release like constant sex. But
Well,
yeah, I agree. Our theory is that like just like in science class, if you remember science labs, you would have to have more than one person. One Jolly would have to go home to his family at some point, just like William Joseph Bryan. That means
Mhm.
Sirhan would be left unguarded. So you'd have to have someone there at all times guarding Sirhan during the white fog. Um, I'm sorry, guys. I'm really, really tired. I know I'm kind of getting
you're
off.
fine.
You're doing good. You're doing fine.
Well,
I'm rambling a little bit, but yeah. So basically, all these guys are sort of connected. The question here is, yeah, we have Air Force, we have Navy, you probably have Marines, Army. Like, I guess the thing that may connect them all might either be the OSS or the CIA. Would you
well,
agree with that, Dana?
Yes, I absolutely would, because I mean,
Some sort of intelligence work.
yeah,
it has to be.
since you bring up CIA a few minutes back, when you list Jolly West and all these guys, and we're talking about lore and things like that, mythologies. There's Sidney Gottlieb of CIA MK Ultra. So Gottlieb might have been, he was known as the occultist, the lore, the wizard
mhm.
guy, and he might be the CIA connector to all of this.
Well,
I
then
wouldn't
there's
disagree
Ingo
one bit.
Swan.
Then Ingo
Ingo Swan
Swan,
is
same thing.
totally right there in the
Yeah.
spiritualist world,
Oh
And the
yeah,
Scientologist. Yeah.
Scientology. Yeah. So,
right.
speaking of, so a lot of people that are kind of new to this are like, well, how are I see how processians are starting to fit into this fold, but how do process church people and Scientology people interact, or do they?
They, well, if you ask them, they're gonna deny it. None of them know each other. They've never met. However, it's the process story is that Marianne and Robert were declared suppressive people. However, there was no real fair game run on them. They were declared in December of 1965. That paper was pulled from the FBI raid during Operation Snow White. Um, they never had fair game run on them. They were never punished or legally attacked, since Scientology loves to engage in lawfare for the use of the e-meter that they renamed the P-scope. Did they find a P-scope at Spawn Ranch, or did they find an e-meter? Who really knows? But they are the same in practice, and I say that up to the point that David Miscavige came in and there was the little coup d'etat against L. Ron Hubbard, because that is what happened as far as in the hierarchy of the church. It was basically a coup d'etat. So Hubbard's tech, his teachings, Dianetics, the process practiced the exact same thing. It was about flattening your emotion. Same thing with Scientology, removing your emotional reaction, basically making you, dead-eyed and dead inside, right? So, I mean, even Manson had the 1,000-yard stare. Multiple people said that. So did a lot of the girls. They had that down. And the process was said to have the same thing. If you ask Scientologists, though, they don't want to own Manson, let alone the process. They don't want anything to do with it. The problem with that is during the raid of Operation Snow White, there are documents out there showing, and I know for a fact up until at least 2 years ago, they're still keeping tabs on the Manson case. They still want to keep the lid on it. They followed his every move in prison. According to them, while he was in prison, he got 150 hours worth of auditing in a very short amount of time, which drove him insane to the point that he was begging to go into the hole to get away from his auditor. Interesting side note, his auditor, Lanier Raymer, ends up going and working in Westchester County right before the Son of Sam crimes start going on in New York. Just a little tidbit there that I recently found out. But according to the Church of Scientology, in these records that were pulled, they said that somebody brought him acid. They brought Manson acid after this 150 hours worth of auditing and throwing him in the hole with LSD. When he came out, he said, "I left my soul in the hole." After getting out of jail, when he's in LA, I believe, can't remember which family member it is. It was I think it was Tex that he was with. They went to the Celebrity Center, the Church of Scientology there in Hollywood, and they wanted Manson to do some sort of compensation course, which involved basically scrubbing toilets. And he basically said, "Screw you guys, I'm already clear. I've gone clear already. I don't need to do any of that." They just don't want to take ownership for it, because the rumors are that the LaBiancas were also Scientologists, and so was Jay Sebring. Now, were they Processians? Who really knows? It's interesting, and I just thought of it right now, because you guys had brought up the Shingan earlier. So that angle with Manly P. Hall and the Manly P. Hall Society, because that's where that information came from with Ed, is when Manly P. Hall returned from Japan, and he's kind of espousing this at his lectures about the Shingan and this sort of like tantric weird sex cult vibe going on. That's the exact same time that the process is in Rome with, per their own writings, Sharon, Roman Polanski, Daniele Luna, Klaus Kinski, a lot of very interesting Cielo adjacent characters. And they are starting what becomes a habit for quite some time of group orgies that they call pagan sex rituals. I don't know exactly what they involve. The way that they describe it is it's of an incestuous nature within the hierarchy of the process. So you have the spiritual parent and the spiritual child, and that is who has to absorb one another, as they call it, in front of everybody. But they were doing this in some weird Roman palazzo out, in Rome, whatever.
Sounds like Saturnalia.
Well, that makes me wonder this Roman connection. I keep finding throughout, the 20s, 30s, 40s, all the way into the 60s and 70s, this Delphi connection, which is connecting, this idea of Rome into the theology of these churches.
Well, this ties into what I was thinking. And then when you mentioned the Rome connection, has there ever been a Jesuit thread found through any of this?
Well, all right, I'll give you two options, because I'm not really versed in the Jesuit stuff. The process is really my wheelhouse. So Robert de Grimston, I did the genealogy on him. His grandfather was a clerk of the Holy Orders under the Vatican. He was traveling back and forth to Shanghai, where Robert was born. And this was during the time of the Opium Wars, a lot of opium trafficking going on. I think it's weird that there's a clerk of the Holy Orders going back and forth to Shanghai for no reason and going under the Vatican on the ship manifest. It says he's going, under the cloak of the Vatican. Now, the second angle is in Ed Sanders' lawsuit in 19, I think it was in 74. They had a reverend by the name of Arthur Gibson who was finishing his studies in Rome. Turns out he admits on the stand that he was actually doing process rituals and spending time with the process while they were all in Rome together. He helped them set up their chapter in Toronto and then ended up testifying on their behalf in Ed Sanders' court case, saying that if he had his own church, that he would put their sex issue out for his congregates to come and take for themselves, which is really wild because, again, this guy is working for the Vatican the entire time, and that magazine promotes rape. So I just think that that's really crazy to me that he would say that.
Wow.
So I mean, there's two threads, but as far as the rest of them, it's kind of a grab bag.
What you just said there, I kind of looked at her and indicated with the travel and the diplomatic cover of the Vatican, boy, I'm just getting that there's a Jesuit thread, a Jesuit hand in this, because remember, they take that oath that they don't take an oath to serve God. They take an oath to serve the Pope, the papal system, the corporation. And as we know, they are the Templar commandos, spy, extraordinaire operatives of the Catholic Church, of the Roman Catholic Church. So, I haven't, I mean, I don't know if O'Neill mentions the Jesuits at all. I've only read half of Chaos, but I've never seen anyone else notice or ask if there's a Jesuit thread. And my research in the history of California and their nefarious hand in the history of this state since they were allowed back and they came to they returned to California in the mid 19th century. I see what they've been doing as a total fueled by revenge for being cast out of the Americas centuries ago because of all their narcissistic, political control maneuvering they were doing. Right. They resented that. And they had the Franciscans and the Dominicans, as their puppets running the mission system. Well, and they've been behind political powers here in California. I don't know. I'm just getting a complete gut feeling that there is a Jesuit connection to the process and Scientology.
Yeah.
I agree with you, Walter, 100%. Interestingly enough, something that gets overlooked is Arthur Brunner actually worked at a Jesuit school. He was a janitor at a Jesuit school, and he shot Wallace. And well, Dana and I were just talking, trying to figure out when that picture of Wallace and the Process Church was taken together. Also, after Wallace was shot, whose office got called? William Joseph Bryan's.
What a surprise.
Yeah. Not only that, speaking of Wallace, not to change the subject, but to get back on we'll get back on the Jesuit stuff, but if there is a Jesuit connection, but both Thane Eugene Caesar and James Earl Ray both volunteered for Wallace's campaign in 1968 in California.
Yep.
Yeah, that's us. That's like super. What are you doing? Yeah.
That's where I'm going to start unraveling the thread, is that campaign, because that photo of the process with Wallace, obviously it makes sense that they're probably laying hands, they're probably doing a faith healing, but I don't like to operate under assumption. I want to figure out exactly when that was taken, and I feel like that's kind of where you have to start, because I mean, he's sitting behind the desk, so you don't know. You just know that they are under the foundation faith of God or the millennium. We don't know at this time. I do have some other genealogy that I'll dig up and I'll send over in an email to you guys, because nobody really seems to care. And I think it's a bigger deal about Robert de Grimston's family, because it's like, that breaks the narrative about how him and Marianne met, because that entire story is a lie on its face. And I've proven that it's a lie. But the stuff with his family, I keep digging, and I'm just like, okay, I've got like weird sort of nobility with the Day Grimston. That's strange, but I think the Vatican stuff and the opium trafficking is much stranger, and I think that it does speak to a large level of protection. And I think that that's what they were trying to hide in regards to making Marianne seem like, the hand that both choked and fed the process. And it's like, I think that they're protecting Robert because of
Right.
Robert's family lineage.
Oh,
Okay.
but speaking of Catholicism and the Jesuits and all that, Marianne de Grimston, whose nickname is Hecate, Walter, was it called when the Catholic Church fails at converting pagans to Catholics?
Sync.
So they go for it.
So they'll take their pagan gods and they'll slap a Catholic veneer on them. It's called syncretism. Like,
Syncretism.
yeah, Saint Catherine of Alexandria never really existed. They took the autobiography of the actual historical Hypatia of Alexandria, the daughter of the librarian of Alexandria during her lifetime, and a brilliant woman, went to schools and learned things that women in those days were not allowed to learn. She was amazing. They took part of her biography and they took Hecate, a bunch of stuff from Hecate. They mixed them together and they invented Saint Catherine of Alexandria. And so Saint Catherine is a syncretic saint. She was really just concocted because they knew they could not stop Hecate veneration. They knew it. So that's what they do. When they can't stop it, they syncretize.
And where is Rudolf Hess from?
Oh, was he born in Alexandria? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Dana, of the things you investigate and have investigated, what have you found has triggered the opposition the most?
Oh, well, I use the terms interchangeably. Scientology in the process, because they are interchangeable.
Yeah.
Doug Messner, aka Lucian Greaves of the Satanic Temple, he thinks that he can perfect the use of the e-meter. He has one at the headquarters up there in Salem. He talks about it all the time. That he's going to make the technology better. Sounds real Scientology to me. He also discusses how the Baphomet statue for the Satanic Temple is designed and based off of process theology, the reconciliation of opposites. These people are the new process, or as I like to call them, the satanic faction of the process, the four great gods. They're just, the Satan faction. But, it also does upset the Scientologists because, I'm certainly not going to spoil chaos for you. I think it's a valuable read, but the Scientology angle is missing from that. And it seems again that nobody wants to touch it. And
there's something else missing from it too.
There's quite a few things. There's quite a few things.
Yeah.
So. Me and Tom have had some very unpleasant exchanges. We do not get along. But it just seems that people have this fear of being fair gamed by Scientology, and I get it. I've had it happen to me quite a few times, and the process operates the same way, and so does the Satanic Temple. Once you kind of realize that they're all the same thing, it's it's all under the umbrella of Scientology.
Well, I was going to say, and let's look at fundamentalist Mormons. Along with Processians and Scientologists. One of their pieces of literature that I find all three of them kind of just cover up and talking about, well, what does these three very religious groups have to do with UFOs? And they each have a part of literature called the Urantia book. Are you aware of that? Yeah. So we find this, especially in the 60s and 70s literature of Scientology, along with Mormon Church, we find, all of these like fundamentalist Mormon, but it's also in the 1980s Mormon Church and pre-80s of, should you hide to Kolob, Let's go be gods of our own planets, and we will populate them with multiple wives. Now, polygamy is this continuing theme throughout each of them in their fundamentalist way, in so many of the cults as well. And I think, just postulating an opinion, really, honestly, I think that this has to do with uh, the MK Ultra of this whole, producing serial killers, essentially is what kind of we're talking about with what connects all of these together with California, with these people who have done horrible, horrible things to lots and lots of people. So how do you think, Dana or Todd, the Urantia book could fit into Processian lore or some of the others?
Todd, do you want to go first?
Go ahead, Todd.
Well, we're talking about like the UFO stuff and the MK Ultra stuff.
Mhm.
Well, it's all about mind control. Now, the interesting thing, like, and Dana can speak to this even more than I can, is that the idea that the Process Church was in contact with these higher beings and stuff like that. It's very much like the Nine from 1952, where that seance was held in Maine, where they thought they were in contact too with like other beings and whatnot. Um, you know, I think that that's sort of the connection to like the UFO stuff. Dana, what do you think?
I think you're absolutely right. I think that the process really tries very hard to paint their dipping of the toes into the UFO scene as more so just trying to bring new congregants in and get some money by holding these UFO conferences. For some reason, they get really close with Betty Hill, which I think is extremely suspicious, and these different psychic fairs. But in even before they went to Stuhl, they were reporting that they were having contact with extraterrestrials. Timothy Wiley specifically says that he was approached and befriended by a British intelligence asset who came to find out what Wiley knew about aliens. I'm like, okay. So what the truth of that is, I don't really know. I'm of the opinion that at the end of the day, what they are actually getting in contact with is definitely something not of this world. I just don't think that it's aliens. I think that this is rooted in that really old, Vatican research about, possibly summoning demons or trying to summon demons and, figure out, the essence of life, like the human spirit. I think that that is what it's about because in the process's original incorporation documents, it's a shell company that pretty much doesn't exist, but it was named after Robert and Marianne, called RMS and MA de Grimston Limited, because they weren't the process in London until after the Manson murders, which is really strange. And they had it for a very short amount of time. But in their incorporation documents under RMS, that states that they are researching the human spirit and things that are associated with it. It is science, it's scientific research. Now, to me, that says two things. One, old Hubs gave them orders to go and start a different cult. And B, someone else was also funding it and sanctioning it, whether through a black budget or whatever the case may be. And obviously, I think that they were working in concert with, at least one of the American intelligence agencies, because there's a lot of weird stuff with the Profumo affair and JFK and weird stuff in New Orleans, which is where they get incorporated by wandering bishop Tommy Jude Baumler. So I think that that's extremely sus. Yeah, it's super shady. So it's like, and he's also a hypnotist. He has his own hypnotist like institute down there for a short amount of time. So I just,
and just like in Mormonism, we see it in just the regular Mormon, they are consumed with hypnotism. hypnotism is the answer for everything.
Wow. I didn't know that.
When it comes to therapy, you want to quit smoking, anything, you're having a sex addiction, whatever.
They use hypnotherapy as a big deal.
They use hypnotism. Yes.
If you, Dana, if you let's see, if you heard of, you know, a group or an individual who would sell, he would host retreats that you could pay to go to, where you would psychically, you try to psychically connect with aliens, extraterrestrials, to bring UFOs down to appear. Would you suspect that someone involved in that might be Scientology, or, you know?
Oh yeah,
Processing?
absolutely. I mean, Hubbard had his whole Xenu thing, right? Like,
Right. Yeah.
he's a total sci-fi nerd, and then the process has, like, you know, the beings, the grays that they meet in Stuhl
Right.
while they're starving themselves and beating themselves in huts,
Right.
which is also very bizarre. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I absolutely think that it's a
Okay.
deep sci-fi angle with Scientology.
Well, there's two individuals in the UFO community, well known for this, who do just that. They host retreats. You can pay thousands of dollars. You can go to their little retreat for the weekend on a property they control, and you can meditate and psychically project, and you bring down UFOs, and, you know, allegedly it really works, which others have investigated, and of course they believe they're staging this. They have buddies out there with drones, lights, or whatever.
Yeah.
But there's two guys who in the UFO community who do this, and it's with meditation and trying to bring down the aliens.
I remember what you're talking about. This is kind of
and people look at it as just innocent, you know, oh, we want to contact the aliens, and you know, the shtick that goes along with that. But that's kind of a thing. And like you said, now I know that at Contact in the Desert, there's a circle of people that have their little private nighttime parties, and what I've heard that goes on there is, you know, drug use, a little swapping partners kind of stuff going on. And this involves some, you know, from what gets reported, well-known people in the UFO community,
like Laurel Canyon. And another thing too, like the Laurel Canyon also, like Canab, was called Little Hollywood. So here we have again, you know, Outlook Mountain happening just outside of Laurel Canyon. Lookout Mountain, where all these films are being made. And then what kind of films got made in Canab? Well, a lot of Mormon films got made there. There's a lot of original Mormon history coming into Utah that Brigham Young supposedly founded Canab, Utah, Canab.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a lot of spaghetti westerns filmed out there as well, which is kind of weird, you know, when you start going down the timeline of like the transition from spaghetti westerns to, you know, this sort of edgier, like biker, you know, hippie movies, because I found it's in Jack Nicholson's biography. It turns out that it was Jack Nicholson, and why can't I think of the other guy's name? I'm gonna have to look it up. But Jack Nicholson spent every single day at the Manson trial from day one. He was there every single day taking copious notes. Wow. Why? I don't know. I'm beginning to wonder, just for my own edification, if you guys aren't right about the Bob Evans sunglasses thing, because I'm wondering, they're there for a reason, right? They're there for a reason, and I'm very curious as to what that reason is.
Well, Nicholson, remember, he started his career with, and famously started his career with, appearing with, and also writing and directing Roger Corman films that Roger Corman produced, and yeah, you're right. The Corman was right in there with producing the biker films that emerged from the 60s and 70s.
And who was technical advisor on one Roger Corman film?
The leader of the Hells Angels guy.
The one that the film that's the short stories of Edgar Allan Poe.
William
Joseph Bryan.
William Joseph Bryan.
Joseph Bryan, right?
Yeah, and then Sharon Tate was in the film, where it takes place in a castle in Europe, and she's one of the siblings, and they're psychic.
Eye of the Devil.
Eye of the Devil. Yeah, Eye of the Devil.
And now is her
Mhm.
dad in any of the movies?
I don't think so. I
No,
don't think her
Sharon.
dad is.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
sure.
Now, this I did
We
just
won't talk
find. It
about
was Dennis Hopper. So Jack
Dennis
Nicholson
Hopper.
was there every day of the trial, and
Yeah.
Dennis Hopper was allowed to meet with Charles Manson in the courthouse alone for 2 hours, and no one knows what that conversation was. It was completely off of the record.
Oh, that's
Why?
big time illegal. That is
Why?
not supposed to happen.
What?
Well, according
Yeah,
to
that
Jack
they have
Nicholson's
that kind of
biography,
communication in the courtroom.
That's
Courtroom or
very strange.
jailhouse?
Yeah,
In his cell or the courtroom?
in the courtroom.
In the courthouse. So they took him
In the
up to a private
courthouse.
room and allowed them to do that. And I guess afterwards, Charlie requested the Easy Rider team to produce his life story.
Yeah. Hey,
Wait a minute.
Dana,
Yeah,
you
that's
know who
not right.
the lighting designer was on Easy Rider?
No.
I'm starting to wonder because Stanley Dean Baker murders a this famous lighting designer named Robert Salem in
Hmm.
April of 1970. I'm just wondering if there was some sort of connection there between, you know, this guy probably worked on movies, being a lighting designer and all that. And I was just wondering if there's like a connection between Easy Rider and him. That's all.
There could be. I'll come back to it. I'm putting a note in my phone right now.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's the Hollywood, and it maybe the Hollywood thread hasn't been fully pulled yet because
No, I don't think it has at all. I think we're missing quite a bit of information.
look how much they protect
Excuse
that
me.
little creep, or they revere him, and oh, let Roman come home. He's like he's a big hero of theirs, Roman Polanski, and it's weird how they particularly that generation of Hollywood and the generation
Yeah.
after, how they've been conditioned that Roman Polanski's an okay guy. He's not an okay guy. He's a
No,
brilliant
he's not.
filmmaker, but
Right.
Well, it's
Now,
also. Oh, go ahead, Todd.
oh no, I was just gonna say, you go first, Dana, but then I have something to say about the Jesuits.
Okay. So with Roman in that book, Jack Nicholson's biography, it's interesting because he talks about Roman and basically blames Roman being exiled from the States on Sharon Tate having such misfortune to be murdered, which I think is very strange. That was a quote from Jack Nicholson, but he also says he details a really interesting timeline. Roman thought that Sharon was underage, and that marriage was brokered essentially by Bob Evans and the head of Playboy International at that time. They're the ones that set Roman and Sharon
Wow.
up, which is also weird if Bob knew that Roman thought that Sharon was underage. I just think that that's really strange.
Yeah.
Yeah.
whoa,
Um,
I hadn't heard that. Wow.
yeah. What I was gonna say about the Jesuits too, and I'm surprised I didn't mention this earlier, but the interesting thing is most of California, especially in the 1960s, there were about 3 million Catholics. Now, if you're in a situation where people are becoming more secular or leaving the church, one way to like scare the crap out of people to get them to go back to the church is if you unleash a bunch of cannibal Satanist hippies, or at least you
Sure.
write about them in the newspapers, right?
Yeah, and
Mm-hmm.
like I told you, the Jesuits, they were pissed off that they got kicked out of the Americas, and then by the time they returned to California, Mexico, during its brief time, and I like to point out a very brief time that California was owned by Mexico, for crying out loud. It was Spain for 3 centuries, Mexico for a blip, and then it's been United States since then. But one of the really good things that the Mexican governor did were the what was it, the non-secularization laws. And what that did was that took California's governance out of the hands of the church. Finally, it turned over the big estates that the church had established, the missions had established, and it turned those lands back to the natives and the Californios. That's the Spanish born European folks that, in California. And it told the missions, you get your immediate property, and no more enslaving the natives, which is what they did. Father Sarah was an asshole, for a long time. Oh, Father Sarah, Junipero Sarah. The guy was an asshole and terrible, a sadist. And it really, really pissed off the Jesuits that these non-secularization laws. And then, of course, when you get the United States in, they're like, yeah, we like that non-secularization part. We really like that. And they've seen just what you said, Todd. California had become a basically a secularly governed, non-church governed place, and the Jesuits. I go into this in my just too long chapter in my Secret Missions 5 Veiled Destinies, my 97-page chapter, because I go into all this history with the Jesuits and how they were behind the political movements of the 20th century. They're behind Jerry Brown, okay, both times he became governor, and they're behind Gavin Newsom. These two guys went to the same Jesuit university, Santa Clarita, and the Jesuits have their claws into these guys, and they're part of the Jesuits are behind the destruction of California's agriculture, the move towards that, the move to destroying California's
and Arizona
economic base, and by extension Arizona, because they resent losing control over California, because their vision of the mission system was, them being in control.
Yeah.
So I could see them in the 60s having a hand in causing all this chaos, to use that term. Let's stir up the crazy Scientologists. Let's back the processians and all this stuff. Just like you said, just like, both of and others have pointed out, that it's to cause this fear and terror and horror and chaos,
Right. Well, I suspect, William J. Bryan belonged to the old Catholic Church, but I kind of suspect later on he left the old Catholic Church and became part of the Jesuits and joined the Jesuit order.
So he was part of the old Catholic Church, which is a thing. Was he a wandering bishop? Was he Episcopi Vaganti? Do we know?
Yeah, he was.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
What do you think of Dana? How does the whole wandering bishop Episcopi Vaganti thing turn up in your research?
I mean, the first that we notice it is Tommy Baumler. There's a lot of weird stuff going on in New Orleans. I think, in my personal opinion, because, Louisiana operates under Napoleonic law, I think that it was a strategic move by the process to go there. But how did they get linked up with Tommy Baumler? The story that they tell is it's one of the members' mothers who owned the Seven Seas bar. But then you also have like Madame Toops right there, and you also have in Jim Garrison's investigation regarding Carrie Thornley, they're talking about Barbara Reed being with the process, being neck deep, he said, in the process. So I think that there is a process angle even to JFK, which is really weird, even like JFK adjacent people besides Tommy Baumler, because, Tommy Baumler was basically Guy Bannister's muscle for infiltrating like these liberal movements on these college campuses to take out the commies. And it's like, is that really what he was doing? I don't really know. I think it's really interesting. I didn't know this about Moonbeam Brown, but according to Immigration Services and the FBI in Ed's files, they are of the opinion that old Moonbeam Brown is a processian himself. He was seen hanging out, spending a lot of time with them, possibly involved in some weird, what they said, homosexual activities with the process.
Was this before or after he was at a Jesuit seminary? Because he was going to be a priest, and he was at a Jesuit seminary.
This was in the 70s, I believe, the early 70s.
This was after he had given up the idea of being a priest. See, I wonder if he was undercover under the instruction of the Jesuits, or pushed in that direction.
That's exactly the MO.
Because of the Jesuits to get involved with the processians.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I actually met a wandering bishop. I met Thomas Beckham while I was working at Goodwill.
Yeah.
I wasn't very conspiratorial, but apparently Hillary Clinton backed into his car when he was doing all the Arkansas stuff. He really pissed him off.
Hillary Clinton did a lot worse things than
Yeah,
that.
Hillary Clinton. Good
I
Lord.
wouldn't say anything to her if she hit my
There's-
car.
there's a
Gosh, I would
monster.
be
Yeah,
like,
you-
where's my ice pick?
You can end up on the list.
Well, she wanted him to pay for it.
Oh, of course. Of
Yes.
course.
And opinion, but I believe she's clearly a traitor, needs to be hung for treason. That's my opinion.
Really?
I do not like her.
So
I might edit that out. We'll see.
I think a lot of people would agree with you. I don't
Yeah,
think
I
that you're
agree.
alone in your
I think-
feelings there.
I think
She's
that we can-
horrible. It's been revealed just how much blood is on her hands, and it's been revealed for a long time.
Which, talking about the Clintons, talking about Arkansas and what they might have been involved with and stuff, and things that we all know about, this opium, drug trade thing, Vietnam's going on during all this, and as we know, there was the triangle there, right? I think they called it the Golden Triangle, where there was the opium and heroin trade. They were bringing it back. According to the story, they're bringing it back on military aircraft, right? And probably diplomatic pouches, because when you're, I remember when I was with the FBI on the surveillance teams, when our Soviets would come, we'd have to go to the airport and make copious notes and take pictures, surreptitious photos of the diplomatic pouches that they're unloading from the planes, because those are off limits. Customs is not allowed to open them or look at them. So as you can imagine, how much stuff over the years has been smuggled in through and out through diplomatic pouches, right?
Not just that. Okay, so over in Laos and Cambodia and Vietnam, there were battle groups deployed by the Navy. So aircraft carriers are a pretty big ship. Now imagine the entire hull of the aircraft carrier and every fire extinguisher filled with opium, cocaine, and heroin.
Yeah,
that's quite a bit.
It's
and
a lot.
Technically, the Navy itself is not going to know that's what's happening, but it's true. That's what happened. That's how a lot of the huge amounts of drugs
it's easy. It's easy. It would be easy to smuggle contraband through via military deployments. Although when I was transiting through from Iraq, I wasn't transiting with a military unit. I was going through the Heathrow airport like everyone else does, and they took my web gear and my combat knife and everything. The damn Brits, clearly I was working with the US and stuff, but those bastards took my personal property from the inside of my bag. But yeah, diplomatic pouches, military stuff. It's just easy. Now, how many Processians were in or had connections to the military, Dana, in your research?
Most of them, right?
So Robert, I finally found proof that he was in the service on the Brit side. So I'm not too familiar with their history. He was in the Royal Air Force, I believe, and then the King's Hussars. There are rumors, but I still haven't seen proof that a couple of the other founders were in the service. I haven't been able to find anything. Now, Timothy Wiley's mother, I did confirm she was an intelligence asset under the Ministry of Economic Warfare under MI6. As far as the American side, by the time they got here and started recruiting, most of the founders, a lot of them were, the intelligentsia, going to college and, a bunch of elitist little shits, whatever. I think that there was one who was, a draft evader, and they started this whole, evader program to incentivize draft evaders to, do something a bit more philanthropic, even though I think that all of that was a front. But there's also, considering in the timeline of Vietnam, because we have that going on. And if we're talking, moonbeam and, diplomatic protection, there's also, the blooming pornography industry, right?
Mhm.
And there's a lot of ties to that industry when we're talking about like the Cielo Drive crew. We've got, oh God, why can't I think of his name right now? It's Sonny Franchisi, who financed Deep Throat. Now, Deep Throat was showing all throughout the Pussycat Go-Go's in California. The guy who owned the Pussycat Go-Go's out there, his name was Vince Miranda. He was very good friends with Moonbeam Brown, and he was one of the largest contributors to his Democratic campaigns. There's a lot of other adjacent angles because with Vince Miranda, he had this weird, I don't want to say it was a call girl service in Vietnam, but he would send packages to soldiers and they could order dates. And it sounded like they were being sent in very big duffel bags. And I'm like, why do photos need to come in duffel bags? This sounds very strange. I mean, this is just what the newspapers reported. So maybe it was sloppy reporting on their part. But I think that there's something else going on there as well, as far as like the pornography, possible other dark video angle that
Oh,
was rumored to be going on at Cielo Drive and, Mama Cass's house and so on.
wow.
Mhm.
Um, I wonder if Tom O'Neill talks about this regarding some of the others, but I wonder if Roman had Polish intelligence ties, and that I'm
I
not going
think
to
his
go too
uncle
far
did.
into that
I think
because
his uncle
that's
did, but
yeah,
That's
because that's kind of
interesting.
part of my big thread that I'm pulling. So I'll leave that there. But
fair.
I
Fair.
just can't disconnect. The Vietnam was going on very active during all of this, and we're talking about the drug trade and the COINTELPRO and the military intelligence stuff, the MK Ultra, and its connection to all
Sorry.
these groups. I think that that's something that I don't know if that thread's been pulled enough. If any whatever connections any of these people had to the war, to the trafficking going on back and forth from there to here with the Golden Triangle, and I believe wasn't the Phoenix program. I think the military guys in the Phoenix program were involved in this
Mhm.
to an extent. Unless I'm misremembering, and so that would be interesting to. I didn't know this about Jerry Brown and Miranda. Here he is, a former Jesuit seminary student, and there he has, you would think that he kind of wouldn't have those kinds of connections, but there it is, obviously, and that was his single biggest donor, Miranda, the guy that owned the
That
Pussycat
was one of his biggest donors, and he was also one of his very good friends. And I actually have the file pulled up from Ed right now. So it says the long and short of it was the INS investigator that they had been working with. He said he stopped short of saying that Jerry Brown was or is the process, but it appears that Jerry Brown used his considerable influence to change the direction of any investigation regarding the process and stonewalled other things. And it also discusses his brother. They called it like the Jerry Brown group of the process.
Mm-hmm.
And this was all occurring around 1974. That's where they're talking about like this homosexual alleged activity. But I mean, that is a weird connection, right? And then I'm also thinking like Moonbeam was living down the street from the Four on the Floor murders later on. That's
Yeah.
drug trafficking. He's within walking distance of all of that. I think that there is a really strong connection to drugs, possible human trafficking. Obviously, there has to be the protection of, diplomacy to protect these people. It can't just be these intelligence outfits.
Some of the I remember at the time when Newsom got divorced from Kimberly Guilfoyle. Um, there were a couple of articles. I remember reading one, and I can dig it out and get you the source. But one of her last straw was Gavin's sexual peccadillos. He wanted to bring multiple partners into the bed with them, and she was like, no, thank you. And then shortly after this, there's the scandal where you find out he had seduced and been having an affair with his campaign manager and very good friend's wife. So, who knows what Gavin's up to? He does have the reputation, for, or did, for being the swinger man, so yeah. It's interesting how Jerry has these connections, and there's the rumors about him, and then Gavin, and we all know here that one of the two main things that cults use, right? Cult-minded groups, the sex and the drugs.
Yeah.
Right. To lure you into the black magic. That's what the black magic groups do.
Well, for the blackmail.
If you like the sex, the wild sex you're having, try having the wild sex on these drugs. Hey, and if you like the wild sex on the drugs, we got something else you'll find interesting. And then that's where they get them into the black magic stuff, to use a generic term. Yeah. It's
to produce a prophetic effect, essentially.
But that might be how they lured or control. That's how they controlled Brown, and maybe that's how they're controlling, Newsom.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the Manson family I think that at the root of it, like the main cause of it, and I do think that Jolly was part of the architecture of that network. I don't think that he was the hand that controlled it, but I do think that largely the Manson family served to blackmail Hollywood. I think that it was to blackmail the music industry, and also to just gather intel.
Which is why, like in Chaos so clearly puts, I can't talk to anybody.
Well, exactly. And then you come to find out later on, because they just tore it down, I think 2 years ago, but Jay Sebring's studio, he built it, tapped, and wired. So he was listening to all of his clients all the time. That was how he had it set up. Why would he have it that way, right? Because he was apparently into some pretty spooky stuff too. So I do think that at the root of it, it's that. And then, once they get you in and get you hooked and you got all these chicks all around you, it's, hey, what's a little devil worship? It's fine. It's no big deal.
Throw it in and
a little more.
That's what this valley, San Bernardino Valley, is
deal.
famous for. Cults and black magic and nudist colonies and swinger clubs and stuff. That's part of wild. The modern history here in the San Bernardino Valley. That and other dark, nasty things that have gone on. So we're used to it. Hearing, if you've been here a long time, you're used to hearing it.
Well, any final thoughts, Todd, while we bring it to close here?
Well, not really. I'm so pleased and honored to have Dana on and to be part of the show. And again, guys, you're gonna have to excuse me. It's sort of a long day at work.
Oh, that's okay. Did we cover everything that we were going to?
Was it Maliah? Was there a woman that something about a woman Dana sort of figured out something that she didn't realize she figured out or something like that?
Me? I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't know. Well, anyways,
I'm not recalling anything, Todd, at the moment. It might come back to me. But I do want to talk about Dana, you have started up a rather new Patreon page. Is that right?
Yeah, so I started the Patreon page just to give people kind of a break from the insanity of the YouTube live chats, because they are insane.
Yeah.
And I've forced myself finally to sit down and start recording and organizing my process research to try and give it a timeline. That way, I know that's easier for people to digest, and my research is a real hot mess. My old videos are real embarrassing. So I'm trying to get all of that organized for people. That way it's out there and, maybe get some new ears on it. But Yeah, it's not anything too special. I'm just, trying to give people a place to break away from all the ex-Scientology nonsense on YouTube.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like Dana and I were talking about that this research, it's way too big for one person. I mean, there's just
It
so many
needs groups.
connections and it takes a team, even bigger than a team. It's gonna take a whole freaking community working together to make any sort of real headway at all, you know?
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
just
It does.
so
And
big.
We got
it
to
has
start
to
having
be
our
people that
own.
you trust.
We got to start having our own
Right.
workshops, where we can, via Zoom or in person, gather and you know, share, compare notes and
Hmm.
see who's working what, because each of us have different pieces of the puzzle, right?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
that's the
Exactly.
benefit of doing
And
this.
it's like Dana said, it's like the Yellow King. If you start obsessing about these cases and doing this research, like your personal health begins to suffer,
Mm.
right? It
Life
becomes an
has to take care of
obsession,
itself.
and there's it can have bad effects,
Well, that's
right? So,
why that
you
that's
know,
where that's where experience in law enforcement investigation comes in handy, because you develop that grim sense of humor and knowing
yeah.
when to
Take
time
a
to turn
break.
it off. And
Yeah.
you know me, I build models, I make jokes about this stuff, because that exact thing, Todd, because you're right, it can, I mean,
Yeah.
that's the reason why after 7 years of my primary focus was investigating the Empire of the Wheel thing, 7 years and 3 books, I had to put it down. And that's why I wrote the first Secret Missions book, because of that very thing. I had to get my head out of the Empire of the Wheel, because I was starting to not hallucinate this stuff, not see stuff that wasn't there. You begin to see what is there. You begin to
Mhm.
see the fabric. When you start looking at, when you start seeing synchronicities, legitimate synchronicities, and these connections, and you start seeing, you start looking closer at the fabric of reality, and you're seeing the threads, and you look at this, particularly this particular thing. I'm being redundant there, sorry, but see what a mindset, I go right back into it. Seshari taught me about karmic frequencies, just that alone. Joseph
Mhm.
Farrell, he warned us privately. He said, be careful with that stuff, because that way lies madness. And he's not kidding. And so, yeah, like you said, Todd, you have to know when to pull back,
Mhm.
when to,
Mhm.
you know be light, because it can, but it's just so it's just so seductive to be
Yeah.
pulling threads and investigating and figuring stuff out. I can't stay away from it. I don't know about you two, but I can't stay.
Neither can I.
I'm kind of I'm the same way.
And she's the same way too. I know. It's like,
Yeah.
that's why
I'm
we're
into
here
stuff.
tonight with all of us. But yeah, that's why I like to ask if we covered everything, because you talk about, hey, come on the show and let's talk about this. And then sometimes you get sidetracked. So that's why I asked, did we cover what we intended to cover?
For the most part, I think. Dana, is there
Yeah.
anything else you want to add or talk
No, I
about?
think that this was great. And yeah, we definitely got to do it again. I think
Yes.
putting
We're
everybody's
making it
brains
regular.
together, I would
We're gonna
the everybody has their different, strengths, and I'm very, very, very curious about your thoughts on chaos once you finish it, because then I'm gonna share my heavy
Okay.
criticisms with
Yeah.
you, and we
I
can
I
kind
think
of bounce ideas from there.
Yeah, I think I could see why you would have them, absolutely. And I'll put it to this way, just a little hint, not too much of a hint. I don't want to give a
No,
hint.
you can't.
I'll say it offline.
You gotta hold this.
I will not say this being recorded.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I do have to hold it. And that's what Joseph Farrell said. He said, by all means, guard this until you've done enough
Yeah.
to then present it.
Bring it
So,
out.
so he's right.
Mhm.
I want to take that advice. So
Yeah.
there was something that I was going to say, hey guys, let's all gather and talk about this particular thing. but it's out of my head. When I remember it, I'll send you guys an email, and maybe we can do us four
let's do this again. Definitely.
Yeah.
show
Like
on
it.
that particular thing if I
Yep.
think about it. One last thing. You mentioned Dennis Hopper. You mentioned Dennis Hopper talking with Charlie and being at the thing. Think about his characterization of the photographer in Apocalypse Now. Hey man, the guy's, but it's very Charlie-esque. And I always thought that, wow, he's really channeling Charlie Manson.
Right.
And
It's
did you know,
Dianetics, man. It's Dianetics.
yeah, it's Dianetics, man.
Mhm.
Did you know that character was based on Errol Flynn's son? Did you know that, Dana?
I did not know that.
Errol
That's really
Flynn's son was a
interesting.
photojournalist. He had started in acting. It wasn't for him. He becomes a photojournalist. He's over there working with a guy who's a photojournalist, also riding around motorcycles. And they're riding around all around Cambodia and around Vietnam during the war and stuff. And they disappeared. They were probably, executed or whatever by Viet Cong, whatever. But it looks like they might have been doing intel collections. Because Errol did that for the OSS. He collected on, his Nazi associates.
And plus, Dennis Hopper's father was a OSS agent.
So it's interesting that Dennis Hopper, the character that Coppola envisioned was based on Flynn's son, and he just seemed to be acting like Charlie to me in his characterization. But anyway, that's the last thing I wanted to throw in there. So,
all right.
Any more questions?
I think we're good.
Yeah. Where can people find you, Dana, again?
Rotting jewels everywhere.
Yeah.
Okay.
Awesome.
And Todd, we can always find him here in California.
Yes.
One great episode after another.
Thanks, guys.
All right.
And we'll do our thing in the outro, right?
We'll make a little outro and stuff.
Well, thank you again, Dana. Thank you, Todd. And more on this.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys.